Hope Sent a Quiver, written by OrionLady, Chapter 3. Clint lasted another 12 whole hours before he broke down, just long enough to see his kids off to the bus and head out with an explanation for Nathaniel about yard work. Laura scoffed at that. She distracted Nate with reading homework enough that he bought it. He never cared much what his father did during school hours anyway, which, pre-terrified kid living in the woods times, meant renovating the house or harvesting crops or changing tires. Kid, Clint called with more confidence as he walked towards the Sense of 5 this time, seeing as the blanket and backpack had returned to the hammock. You totally don't have to talk to me or anything. I just want to make sure you're still alive. Clint sunk perpendicular onto the hammock and swayed, legs walking him forward and back. I mean, it's kind of a sucky look for an Avenger to turn a blind eye to a homeless kid, you feel me? Steve alone would probably cut the wood himself and roast me alive. Elderly body be damned, not to mention Sam. Ugh, Sam would lambast me. Silence. Clint checked his hearing aid, still working fine. I didn't bring anything this time, he continued. Just my charming personality and the promise of first aid if you need it. Actually, now that I think about it, Steve would roast me alive for leaving a scrappy teen such as yourself out here alone with broken bones. No answer or sign of the boy. Clint rankled the disappointment. After that drama a few days ago, what did you expect? He's petrified of you. Clint turned his attention to the backpack, noting its beloved wear and tear around the zippers and straps. Something told him this wasn't a thrift find, that the kid had likely owned this specific backpack for years. He was about to start exploring the area when a blue shine caught his eye. Clint fingered the smallest zipper on the front, around which was hooked a keychain. An Iron Man keychain. No, not Iron Man. A mini arc reactor. Circular, an earlier model than the triangular one Tony had installed into his suits after his surgery. Like the old days of sending missiles through wormholes, back when Clint's biggest fear was that S.H.I.E.L.D. wouldn't let him return home to his family, or Thor serving them weird mead from his homeland. Clint fingered the back of the keychain, and what do you know, it had a switch. Flicking it on, a familiar aqua glow lit up, surprisingly strong for a watch battery inside a kitschy keychain. Any company logos along the side had long since worn off. Also a well-loved object then. Clint swallowed. Tony. A hand clamped suddenly around Clint's wrist. All cold fingers and bone. The boy tried to wrench on it, but for Clint, it wasn't much force. No, the clammy, tremoring palms got through to him more. Sorry. Clint let go of the keychain. His heart hammered to have the kid so close, arm's reach, touching him of his own volition. No, the boy signed, emphatic, so hard his knuckles snapped against his thumb. His eyes thundered, but his brows drew back, timid. You're right, I shouldn't touch your things without permission. I apologize if I overstepped. The kid elected to ignore him for a moment and bent over the keychain, cupping his hand around the circle. When he saw the steady glow, he deflated. I only turned it on for a minute, Clint reassured him. The boy nodded, flicking it off and backing away to a safer distance, at the foot of the hammock. His eyes cut to Clint, then away. Clint took the hint and rose from the hammock, brushed away any creases. Just came to check in. You like the pizza? The boy pointed at a spot in front of the oak tree, a ring of charred shapes. The remains of a very tiny bonfire. Smart kid. Burned the cardboard? The kid nodded with his fist this time. I don't know if you have any allergies and whatnot, but I figured pizza was a safe bet. There are enough pieces in there to last you for a bit. The boy pointed at his belly with a thumbs up, and Clint couldn't help but chuckle. It was my youngest Nate's idea, so thank him. The kid signed, thank you, and Clint just about melted. The gesture was automatic, pure, like telling your kid to say thank you to the waiter at a restaurant. It forcibly reminded Clint that this boy hardly looked old enough to drive and was homeless, all because the world could be heartless sometimes. Clint wanted to ask a million questions, coax out more of whatever that just was, a bright display of personality tucked away in the gaunt chest. But he just fingered the trash bag roof and sniffed. You must get bored out here. The kid shrugged, a feature of teenagers the world over. Just wondered if you wanted some games or a Rubik's Cube or books or... The kid kept his body angled away from Clint like a shield, but his head twisted around at Mach 1. Clint grinned. You a bookworm like Nate? The kid didn't reply, of course, but he gazed without flinching at Clint now, so he again took the simple win. The boy's fingernails were chipped today, and Clint pondered what he'd been up to. I'll see what I can dig up that nobody reads anymore. The kid signed thank you again with both hands. Clint smiled. Be back in a few hours, Mr. Aloha. The boy unwound once Clint moved further away, but his eyes sparked with anticipation. True to his word, Clint meandered back after supper when a bloodthirsty game of Mario Kart had started in the basement. The kid didn't even notice him leave. Clint gathered up a tote bag full of books. Some were picture books as a gag, while others were Cooper's dog-eared CGI info books. Clint included a bit of everyone's tastes, from Laura's historical fictions to Lila's middle-grade fantasies and coming-of-age novels. Clint himself didn't read much, but he enjoyed a good Tom Clancy now and then, so he could laugh at the fake spycraft. Here. Clint popped them at the base of the hammock, where the kid sat sideways like Clint had earlier, and scribbled into a notebook on his lap. He only remained relaxed if Clint stood a good 6 or 7 feet away. The best I could find, that the kids won't notice missing. Books. Yeah, kid, books. Eat your heart out. The kid ran his hand over the spine of Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus, of all things. Nate's favourite when he was 3. The boy opened it and lingered on a picture of, well, a pigeon driving a bus. Simple drawings accompanied the simple but hilarious story, one Nate never grew weary of hearing. Clint would pay $10,000 right now to glimpse what ran through the kid's mind. He looked speechless to see the plain line illustrations and colourful bird. You need a first aid kit at all? Clint gentled his tone. You can tell me, and I won't judge. I've had to stitch myself up more times than I'm comfortable admitting. The kid hugged the picture book to his chest, as if Clint might try and snatch it from him. Kid, this one I definitely need an answer to. The boy stiffened. He signed fast. Fine. Fine isn't sufficient for me. The boy's hand strayed to bruises on his face. Shock stole over his features when he poked at them and felt the pain. Then the defeated eyes fluttered back, shoulders folded inwards. The boy wrote something in the margin of his notebook and turned it to Clint. Doesn't matter. Clint breathed in and out through his nose 3 times before he could speak without it being a growl. Injuries always matter, kid. From a paper cut to a ruptured spleen. Everything. Another scribble. Know how to bandage broken ribs. The boy astounded Clint by lifting his threadbare hoodie a few inches, and lo and behold, dirty strips of old bandage indeed hugged tight around his upper rib cage. Well wrapped, practiced patterns. That wasn't what had Clint's ears ringing. He forced his eyes not to fix on the undercut of each rib, visible even through the tape. This boy was starving to death. Literally. Clint had seen better physiques on rescued prisoners of war. This wasn't even mentioning the hidden bruises on the kid's stomach and cuts littering his sides. Someone had assaulted him. Brutally. The thought that more bruises might be hiding under the boy's clothes ignited every last artery in Clint's body in scalding prickles. You need new bandages, maybe an elastic wrap. He set his chin. Only years of undercover work kept his tone professional, not a hint of how shaken he felt. How about some painkillers? The boy shook his head, but Clint couldn't translate that. He licked his lips after he did, and Clint just then noticed the empty plastic bottle on the side pouch of his backpack. Shoot, has it been a few days since you've had water or rain to collect? A hesitation. Tight fingers curled around the pencil. Yes, the kid signed, slow, careful, weary eyes on Clint's reaction. He tried not to react at all, but he couldn't help but frown. I never thought about water. Shame on me. The boy's eyes clouded over, and he shook his head again. I'm used to surviving in worse conditions, said Clint, even more shaken at how long it had been since this kid had been properly hydrated. No wonder he wasn't healing. I should know better. I'll grab some water from the house real quick. Clint did, popping his head down to see Mario Kart still in full swing, with Lila very much whooping everyone else. Business as usual, then. He packed a 4-litre bottle of distilled water, bandages, elastic wrap, and the leftover lasagna from tonight's supper into another tote bag. Only 2 lasagna slices remained, though the boy looked like he needed 5 more. It would have to do for now. Here. Clint only panted a little from all the running, also used to much worse in that department. He held out the water. I'll leave the bandages with you so you can... The boy shook his head once he saw the sudden influx of supplies. Nose scrunched. His eyes grew steadily wider. No. He struggled to vocalize, signing it instead. No to what? This stuff? Because I have plenty more, and it's not a big deal. The boy hopped down from the hammock and stepped right into Clint's space. Breath snagged in Clint's throat, bobbing it. He pictured a touching moment. Maybe the kid would use his shoulder for balance in what looked like a wobbly walk at best. Or he'd hold Clint's hand after shaking it, a glorious gesture of trust that he could share with Laura before bed. But the boy placed his hand on Clint's wrist and shoved it away, final as a slap. The trembles made a sudden resurgence. Clint knelt so that the kid was slightly higher than him on the dipped ground. Kid, let's add up some facts, shall we? You're in need, and I have a surplus. The end. I don't see what the problem is. I'm not forcing you into anything. You can leave Casa de Barton whenever you like. The teen shook his head, something desperate in his eyes now. His cheeks flushed, the first hint of colour Clint had seen on his skin that wasn't inflicted. The kid quavered, voice garbled as if someone had stuffed his mouth with aquarium rocks. Wrong. Clint mentally cheered at the small victory. He saw how much effort that one spoken word cost this boy, red around his roots. Clint did him the service of chewing on it. This clearly wasn't about charity, as the boy eyed the water with intense longing. Clint handed it to him, and the kid chugged back a few mouthfuls at impressive speed. Easy, that won't sit well on an empty stomach. The boy nodded. Next, Clint passed him the lasagna and a plastic fork to prove his point that nothing was being taken away or forced. The kid stumbled and sat back down in the hammock. Clint very deliberately stayed exactly where he was, and ate the squares cold, gasping around bites. Clint recognized the symptoms of a shrunken stomach. What's wrong? He waited for the kid to swallow and look down. Being here? On my property? To Clint's astonishment, the kid nodded. If it's my property, don't you think I get a say in who stays here? The kid dropped the fork, covering his face with both hands. He wasn't crying, but Clint watched his face crumple and smooth, a few times behind his caged fingers, the hand straight up to his hair, strangling it. Wrong! Hey. Clint lifted a hand. Don't hurt yourself. The kid thumped his own chest with the heel of his hand, like that was a valid answer to the previous question, and it bucked with another not-sob. How could anyone lay a violent hand on this child? He said thank you to a boy he'd never met, and apologized to Clint for scaring him, and doodled what looked like chemical formulas in his notebook. He had an arc reactor nightlight. The thought of trying to hurt him crashed Clint's brain. Full .exe not responding situation. Couldn't even fathom it. The boy swiped his thumb under his chin, followed by another sign. Not right. Why isn't it right, bud? Asked Clint. You're not intruding. I'm happy to help people in need, and, to be honest, I'm not even doing very much. But the boy's eyes, when he last dropped his hands, were haunted. He removed the lasagna from his lap, with half a piece left. You don't want it? The kid shook his head and handed it back to Clint when he stood up. Wrong, the kid whispered. Clint's throat grew thick. He watched the boy lay on his hammock and turn over so his back was to Clint. A bold move for someone shy of Clint's bulk, but he recognized the boy's need for space more than caution. His stomach plummeted. He doesn't even want food, Clint whispered to Laura, late that night. So late that it was technically the next day. So much for the touching hallmark moment he wished he could share with her. Shoved me away in every sense of the word. Clint, honey, if he was abused, of course he doesn't want you anywhere near him. Clint pursed his lips. I don't think that's just it. No? He didn't say scared or go away. He said me being there was wrong. What am I supposed to do with that? Laura's lips quirked, eyes drooping but attentive on Clint, lying on his back. Remember how Lila was afraid to go to school for the first time when she was 7? She'd been homeschooled up to that point. Clint adjusted his spiky crop of hair on the pillow. We gave her lots of chances to interact with other kids through soccer teams and homeschool co-ops, but something about that big room full of screaming second graders. She refused to budge. I encouraged her to meet those giggling kids inside, gave her a pep talk. Clint Barton, you sat outside the classroom with her for 4 hours. Said you wouldn't leave or take either of you home until she went in and tried it. Plopped right down on the floor by the shoe rack. And oh, what an adventure that had been. Lila's green tutu and cleats fluffed out in an annoyed huff beside Clint on the floor until one of the kids waved at her through the window and she caved. Clint glanced askance at his wife. Where are you going with this? Laura kissed his shoulder with her eyes closed. You're the most stubborn man I know when it comes to caring for people. Don't tell me you've met your match in one teenager. Ouch. If you can save the universe, I should think convincing a homeless kid to eat is small potatoes. And well, Clint blinked. Touché. It turned out that Clint wasn't stubborn, per se. Not in the irritating traditional sense, but boy did he have persistence down to an art form. Plus, years on the job had sculpted patience into his soul. Lots of patience. A routine developed. After the kids left for school and Nate was preoccupied, Clint snuck away with a bit of last night's supper and went to the hammock. Sometimes the boy was there, completely ignoring him, and other times it lay empty. Sometimes the food was untouched, but occasionally Clint spied a few bites taken out of it. Sometimes he just left the food, and sometimes he loitered a while. "'Cause it's lame," Clint was in the middle of saying, stretched out on the ground beside the hammock. He threaded his fingers behind his hair. A small gap in the treetops allowed him to watch the clouds float by overhead in their ephemeral parade. Tacky, really. I feel bad for the actors and people who had family die in the attack on New York. And a musical? For real? They couldn't find a better way to portray us? Some of us already wear tights. Don't tell Cap I said that. So we don't need jazz squares added to the ante of how stupid we can look. My kids and I didn't stay to see the end of the show. Clint waited like he always did, but the boy just laid there, back to Clint, and pretended he was alone. The boy had a routine too, in that sense. They couldn't even call the musical The Avengers. Oh no. Clint sniffed. It's Rogers. The point of my job is to be unseen, and now I'm a cartoon character in Broadway. Clint sighed, overly dramatic. No good deed goes unpunished, I guess. Though, as punishments go, this one's pretty funny. The boy twitched at the words. Clint kept going, feigning ignorance about it. When Lila watched the trailer and heard we would be getting complimentary tickets for Christmas, she laughed so hard milk squirted out of her nose. That reaction did not go away when she saw the opening number. The flip of a page. Clint risked a peek upwards and saw the edge of a book leaning off the other edge of the hammock. A Lemony Snicket title. Reading today, then. Some days it was fake sleeping. Even Clint could see through. Cooper wouldn't stop showing it to classmates for a week. Between you and me, I think he was just glad to have some peer contact again. Everyone's either super clingy, even with people they don't know, or distant and aloof. Not a whole lot of median average in there, at least not in high schools right now. The boy's shoulders went rigid. Clint's voice lowered. You in high school, kid? No answer. Obviously. What am I saying? Of course you're in high school. You don't look old enough to drive, let alone vote. If Clint had hoped nicking the boy's pride would get him to engage, he hit a dead end in the unmoved posture. It didn't discourage him. This kid clearly had a bigger chip on his shoulder than his age or status in the world. Well, Clint stood and wiped leaves off his pants. I'm going to feed our hens, but the lo mein is still here, if you want. I'll come back tomorrow to get the Tupperware. Silence. See you later, and aloha. The next day, there was no sign of the boy, but a note had been left on the Tupperware container, a torn corner of loose leaf. Aloha means the same thing as see you later. You're slipping, super spy. Clint grinned so wide his cheeks hurt, a wonderful aching feeling after its 2-year hiatus. Clink! And gun strapped to a lady's thigh under her skirt. Nat used to hate that in movies. It's uncomfortable and wildly impractical. She hid butterfly knives in her hair or throwing stars behind her ear. Much more efficient. Another metal arrowhead found its place in the lineup beside Clint's hip on the grass. Polymer and fiberglass on the right, metal and bladed on the left, which put him in between the hammock and these rather sharp objects. Not that the kid would try anything. Today wasn't even an eating day. The goulash left untouched by his backpack. Cleaning arrowheads, though, Clint had been doing this since he was a teen, and it helped sort his thoughts. This particular arrowhead had a disc on the end, around the point. Clint gave it one last polish and moved on to the fluid chamber arrows. This guy gets it. Clint waved his rag at the book in the boy's hands. He laid on his side, facing away from Clint as usual, but didn't hide the paperback pages. None of this cloak and dagger stuff. Spies aren't like that, you know. We don't go around stabbing people for fun willy-nilly, or at least I never did. Much. Clink! Clint carefully set down the poison vial arrow. Didn't hold on to it as long as he sometimes did, its glass warming in his palm. John le Carre knew what he was doing. Clint retrieved a Pym arrow next. Bits of grease stained each groove in the spiral design, and he cleaned them with a terry cloth rag over his fingernails. He understood that to be a good spy, you present a boring persona to most people, 90% of the time. Going unnoticed and seeing no action is a stellar spy. The polymer bullet arrow next. That again, I was often in the role of assassin rather than spy. The kid didn't even gasp, cool as a cucumber when he wanted to be. That, or he'd led a far more interesting life than Clint had as a teenager, to be unfazed by Clint announcing he'd killed people for his government. Maybe I'm the bad spy, Clint speculated, since the world knows what I do, or used to do. Not that the Avengers PR team mentioned my connection to covert ops and such, but I'm sure smart thinkers have put 2 and 2 together over the years. A sunny March day, the kid still shivered, too thin, too exposed to the elements, even in the windbreaker and a thick comforter. The unpetaled curls framed white ears and a bloodless nose. Clint peeked around the hammock at points from his place at the foot of it. You like spy novels, kid? No answer. Yet another night of restless sleep and the endless procession dogged at heavy folds around Clint's eyes, but he covered it up with a chipper tone. He had lots of practice at that. It was getting hard to remember the last time he slept the whole night through. I just gave you that one because you seem to like the intrigue stuff or non-fiction manuals. Not exactly easy reading in either case. Clint shaved off a bit of rust on the blade arrow with his hunting knife. Now Clive Cussler, there's a writer who knows his stuff. He's lived it. People who lived it a little make the best storytellers. A quick intake of breath. Clint's hands slowed down. Everything okay? A shudder fluttered the pages and didn't stop. Clint sprang into a crouch and halfway to fully standing. The kid beat him to it, sliding off the hammock and throwing the book into it. As far away from himself as possible, he stared at the battered paperback. Kid? Clint edged closer, hands up. You with me? Clearly not. The boy started pacing, hands strangled around his hair, then down his chest, his shirt front. Harsh pants hissed through his teeth. He made it from one tree, staggered to the foot of the hammock, and back again around the loop. Breathe from your belly. You're going to make yourself sick, Clint coached. You're having a panic attack, but if you can follow my breaths, it'll... The kid ignored him, only this time it wasn't deliberate or out of some self-enforced punishment, in which pretending Clint didn't exist was the only way to keep his world spinning. This time, the kid couldn't hear him, didn't register Clint's voice at all. Way to go, Clint. Pro move. Sure, let's give the abused kid a book about espionage and running from an enemy. What could possibly go wrong? Eyes clenched shut, the boy shot off into the trees, injured wheezes in stereo. Wait! Clint darted after him. Whoa, hey! You're injured and hyperventilating, so just stop for a second. You could pass out. The kid didn't stop, not even with one arm wrapped around still painful ribs. He disappeared behind a tree, and Clint's eyes widened. Literally disappeared. 1 minute he stood by the willow tree, and the next, nothing. Clint spun around a circle and listened hard, but nothing. Not a sound. At times he thought he heard a coughing pant, yet couldn't tell where it originated from. I'm an idiot, Clint breathed, and I'm so sorry, kid. Walking back, he sifted through the last few moments before the kid pulled the runner. Page 98. That's where he'd been when the episode blindsided them both. Clint approached the hammock and turned over the book, now face down. He had braced himself for a torture scene or someone getting clubbed across the head, perhaps a character being chased, maybe a reference to sleeping under the stars or homelessness. That would be unnerving to read for the average Joe, let alone a kid who'd been beaten and starved to the point that Clint genuinely, privately, wondered how the kid hadn't died yet. But Clint's eyes skimmed the page twice, and he still couldn't bring his eyebrows down from his forehead. Amnesia. It was a section about an amnesiac character. Just a giant mystery, aren't you, kid? At least one thing wasn't in question. You've lived a little too.